this clip of Nancy Pelosi. There was a letter released by Blinken and Secretary of Defense Austin yesterday. It was released today, but it was written yesterday. This is to Yoav Gallant. In accordance with U.S. law and policy, including the National Security Memorandum 20, the Department of State and Defense must continually assess your government's adherence to your March 2024 assurances that Israel would facilitate and not arbitrarily deny, restrict, or otherwise impede directly or indirectly the transport or delivery of United States humanitarian assistance and U.S. government-supported international efforts to provide humanitarian assistance to and within Gaza. We have been hearing reports. The UN has said that there has been no food allowed into Gaza, northern Gaza, since October 1st. That's 2 weeks without food coming in. The Israelis had said everybody out of Gaza. A lot of people couldn't go. Some people decided not to go because as they've moved south, they've gotten bombed or shot at. People have left their homes multiple times. It is a war crime. It is an act of genocide to use starvation on non-combatants. Israel knows there are non-combatants there. By decreeing that they shouldn't be there or that they have to leave, in no way mitigates their responsibility under international law. It does not mitigate the crime under international law, and it does not in any way mitigate U.S. law. They go on to write, we are now writing to underscore the U.S. government's deep concern over the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and seek urgent and sustained actions by your government this month to reverse this trajectory. They're talking about the humanitarian situation for over 2 million Gazans. They're talking about Israel hampering humanitarian aid. And they say that within 30 days, Israel must enable a minimum of 350 trucks per day to enter Gaza, institute adequate humanitarian pauses across Gaza as necessary, allowing people in Muwasi and the humanitarian zone to move inland before winter, enhancing security for fixed humanitarian sites and movements, rescinding evacuation orders when there's no operational need, facilitating rapid implementation of World Food Program winter and logistics plan to repair roads, ensuring Israeli coordination liaison officers can communicate with humanitarian convoys, removing restrictions on the use of container and closed trucks, increasing the number of vetted drivers to 400, removing agreed list of essential items from the dual-use restricted list, provide expedited clearance and processing at the port of Ashdod for Gaza-bound humanitarian assistance. They need to ensure that commercial and Jordan Air Force corridors are functioning at full and continuous capacity with some specific benchmarks, and the isolation of northern Gaza and with by specific means. We've seen this in the past. It changed Israel's behavior marginally. Here is Nancy Pelosi on PBS, somewhat discernible, saying that death is sad.
And given that there's an election, are you concerned by the very, very difficult polling for Kamala Harris, particularly regarding Arab Americans, particularly in the swing state of Michigan?
Yeah, well, it is something to be considered. When we talk about this subject, people forget. They forget a Muslim ban instituted by this president. One of the first things he did—
By President Donald Trump.
By Donald Trump, one of the first things he did—
Just to clarify, the question was, what of this war, which Biden is more than enabling. Kamala Harris is not distancing herself from Biden, though she may not have any control over what Biden's policy is. She's not distancing herself from it. And how is this impacting the election? And Pelosi is like, well, these people who are seeing either their relatives or people who look like them get slaughtered have to remember that there was a ban coming into the country. I mean, it's impossible for me to imagine that she thinks that her audience is anybody except for people who are not
except for Democrats who want to say, well, Trump is worse. Okay, but that's not persuasive. I mean, that's persuasive in things like issues like abortion, where there's more of a contrast. It's persuasive on, even what we're seeing with like the tariff policy that Trump's proposing. The Democrats are looking better by comparison. But for this, with the visceral images of what's coming out of Gaza, you can't draw a contrast to Trump without offering an alternative.
And the opposition to the Muslim ban was an organic people up thing where, like, again, people showed up to airports blocking Ubers and stuff like that But
her argument is he's worse because he did a ban, as opposed to, I mean, I happen to think that it's a theoretical case on either side as to who would be worse for Palestinians, Harris or Trump. It's a theoretical case on either side. I happen to believe that Harris would actually be better. But to cite the Muslim ban as evidence of that is just, she can't make this argument because she's not willing to concede that it's a theoretical, it's a jump ball, essentially. Go ahead.
Polling for Kamala Harris, particularly regarding Arab Americans, particularly in the swing state of Michigan.
Yeah, well, it is something to be considered. When we talk about this subject, people forget. They forget a Muslim ban instituted by this president. One of the first things he did—
By President Donald Trump.
By Donald Trump, one of the first things he did in his presidency was to have a Muslim ban. Democrats flocked to their protection, and yet this is what Donald Trump did. And now, because of this situation, which again, Joe Biden has been a friend of Israel, that's for sure, but he has also been a friend of the Palestinians.
Oh,
and even
my God.
before October 7th, when we were meeting our September 30th deadline for the budget, I was going to the Republicans and asking for humanitarian assistance for refugees. They said, we'll give you that as long as it's not used for the Palestinians. So the fact that she would be paying a price is for policies that were very pro-Palestinian is really sad. But death is sad, and that is being reflected. I'm not sure it's all spontaneous. Some of it is spontaneous, it's grassroots, it's truly that. I think some of it is motivated for other reasons.
Yeah, no, some of it's motivated by people seeing genocide on their phones. I mean, she's very disconnected.
I mean, it's movement on her part, because 6 to 8 months ago, she was convinced it was all Russian disinfo.
But the movement that I guess there was a different clip that I sent.
I'm being somewhat facetious.
No, I know. I'm just shocked that she still is using
right. I mean, earlier, a different part of the interview, she's talking about there's leverage and blah blah blah. This question was more, focused on the electoral implications. Yes. But the bottom line is this. From an electoral standpoint, it definitely has the chance of hurting Harris, both as a first order and a second order problem. The first order being that there's going to be a significant cohort of people who are not going to vote for Harris because she is part of this administration. And the second order thing is it's going to inhibit volunteers and enthusiasm, and in a race this tight, when the activists you're relying upon to get out the vote are demoralized, it's a problem. As a moral question, it is just absolutely despicable. It's just absolutely despicable. I mean, the fact that the Biden administration can sit here and watch what's going on without doing anything. I mean, they've sent a 30-day letter saying we need humanitarian things, but it's
they
sort of
delivered
like
on an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, I mean, it's just.
They've already ignored a report. Blinken basically ripped it up back in April, a report that said Israel was blocking humanitarian aid. The only thing that's changed is the political situation. Pelosi did go on to say that the White House hasn't used leverage in the best way, right? That Netanyahu government has the leverage given to the Netanyahu government by the White House, quote, has been used in a way that is most destructive. It seems like a roundabout way to go about criticizing the administration's policy. I don't know. But the problem is like, in my view, this is inevitable, some sort of break and shift in policy if the Democrats get into power. It's just a question of like, what if that break is substantive, and how many people die in the process. We saw, because like the UK and Germany are already restricting weapons. The United States is well behind on this. We stand entirely alone. And even if those weapons shipments stopping is purely aesthetic, that's also stuff that the Democrats would have to respond to in this country. But like, I mean, we're well over 100,000 dead, well over. And over the weekend, there were images of patients hooked up to IVs being burned alive outside Al-Aqsa, which I think was the hospital, if I'm not mistaken, Matt, that we were told for weeks. Was that the misfired rocket?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, like whatever. We've gone through a year of this insane disinformation campaign by
Israel's
Zionists,
bombing tents, and we're watching images of patients, children on IVs just get incinerated.
Yeah, Shaban is the guy's name. He was apparently studying software engineering from the tent. And yeah.
Meanwhile, New York Times comes out with a report that the most moral army in the world, Israel's army, the most moral, righteous army in the world, who are completely handcuffed because apparently their enemy uses human beings as human shields, was found by the New York Times report that Israeli troops regularly forced captured Gazans. And incidentally, when they say captured Gazans, what they mean is citizens who have just been imprisoned for no reason. I mean, I think like you capture Gaza, you just basically round up civilians to carry out life-threatening tasks, including Hamas tunnels. In other words, to function, and these have been reported, but now the New York Times has come out with their own report. They use these people as human shields. After Israeli soldiers found Mohammed Shubir hiding with his family in early March, they detained him for roughly 10 days before releasing him without charge. During that time, Shubir said the soldiers used him as a human shield. He was 17. He was forced to walk handcuffed through the empty ruins of his hometown, Khan Yunis, searching for explosives set by Hamas. To avoid being blown up themselves, the soldiers made him go ahead, Shubir said. In other words, they used him literally as a human shield. An investigation by the New York Times found that Israeli soldiers and intelligence agents throughout the war in Gaza have regularly forced captured Palestinians to conduct life-threatening reconnaissance missions to avoid putting Israeli soldiers at risk on the battlefield. In other words, non-combatants being used literally as human shields.
It's all projection.
I mean, the most moral army in the world.
You know, when you have to say it so many times, it means that you are.
Maybe the opposite's the case.
400,000 children. 400,000 children now displaced in Lebanon. Before anybody else emails me to tell me of like some small pedantic inaccuracy that they perceive in what we discuss on this program about Israel, show me the emails that you have sent to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to CNN, to every other news outlet saying this claim that you allow and perpetrate over and over again, that this military is somehow more moral than any other military, that somehow this is just regular war. Incidentally, it's reported today that Israel has completely given up on any type of negotiations involving any hostages and are moving into their phase now where they will annex or occupy northern Gaza.
Which we were told was never going to happen, and that it was a non-starter for the Biden administration, and the ceasefire talks that were abandoned. And clearly, Matt Miller kind of gave away the game in that questioning that we played, I guess, a week or two ago on the show, where he said we were never interested in the diplomatic solution with Hamas. And Prem Thakur goes, wasn't that the ceasefire negotiations? He's, yes. He had to walk it back. But
the truth is, they've always seen a military solution for them, whether there's a temporary pause in ballistic missiles or not. It's war.
If you're not ever look at why are you involved in negotiations?
Well,
what I mean,
the public relations value.
Right.
Buying is real time.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.